Today I want to take you through the developer app area. It's a very exciting area as it allows you to create your own mini apps within the CRM. So these mini apps have their own subdomain and you can create as many as you want. You can access it via the developer, web apps. Now you see your sites on the left-hand side and pay particular attention to the template site. This is a very specific site that your other sites copy or initialize from, for a better word. Left click on the site and you will display two sections, the global section and the pages section. The global section contains all your globally referenced files, such as your CSS files, your JavaScript files, your view components, and your layouts. You can left click on your layout and the HTML will display. This uses the very well-known Razor syntax. So you can see here, you got your model.properties.title, there's reference. @model is very well-known Razor syntax. Your body now is specified by mustaches or mustache if you prefer, and here we have the footer as well. Now what this refers to is, if we go to pages, we have one page here, and in your HTML there's a right hand section, right, which allows you to have a JSON type notation, right, and these are your properties. They're your properties for that particular page. So in the layout, this is what we're referring to: model.properties.title, and the footer, properties.footer. The body is just the body of your HTML page. So we'll just quickly refer back to the page and test it out. I don't know if you noticed, but you can click on the different files here, or you can go in the header. To remove a particular page, you can click the X. As we've modified it, we think we've modified it, it gives you a prompt. Don't want to save just yet. So let's go back to the HTML, and to test the page, we actually have a link right here. All right, so just click the link. It will open another page because we're still working. One thing to notice is that although we have a certificate that will TLS certificate that will allow demo to LampCRM to be encrypted without any issues, subdomains are not yet covered. So you will just have to accept, and here we go. So you've got your header text. Very simple, very effective, and this is what we had. Now you'll notice that it didn't use the layout, so we'll specify in our HTML, drop down here, specify the main layout, and click save. So this is now saved, and you can see the asterisk here has disappeared. We can now test again, and bang, we have our header text and our footer, which has been displayed. Now let's go back and initialize our template with a proper set of files and CSS that we can use for fully fledged apps. So let's start with Sass files. So we do support Sass files, so they can be compiled or precompiled as CSS. So what we'll do is we work with Foundation mostly. So we can right click and we can add our Foundation file, Foundation, click on it, and you can see it's empty. So where are you going to get your Foundation CSS? Now, we allow you to actually download from JS Deliver, which is essentially NPM online. NPM is a very good tool, but I find it cumbersome, and being able to develop everything within the browser and download the files is just fantastic. So you can enter whichever file you want here. I'll show you actually. Deliver. Here it is. Once on JS Deliver, you can scroll down and you have a search bar to search the different files that you're interested in. So for example, jQuery. Then you can browse the different versions and so forth. So you know which file or which path to specify here. The most common ones and the files that we support have been listed in the drop down. So for example, the foundation sites CSS is right here. So this is the full path to the file. Click download and we automatically retrieve the compiled CSS from JS Deliver. So importantly, notice that requires compilation. In this case, it's not actually a Sass file. Obviously, it's originally a Sass file, but it has already been compiled to CSS. So make sure requires compilation is unticked. Save it, and we're done for Foundation. You may still want to use Sass for your own styles. So let's start with global Sass settings. So right click, new settings. We'll give it a obvious name for global settings, G for global settings. Save. Click on the file. Now Sass settings start with a $. We'll just go with font size for now. I would like a font size of 14 pixels. Save that. Now we'll create our main Sass file. So I'll press enter instead of clicking the save button. Here it is. Click on it. And what we can do in our main Sass file is import those settings. Refer to the file name and the extension SCSS. So now that we've imported the settings, we can create some classes. We'll call the class main font, and it's your standard Sass. We'll give it the color blue. And the font size we will refer to Sass variable font size. That's not a very good name. So we'll go back to settings. change the variable to font standard. Save that. Go back to my main Sass file and change it to font standard. Done. Now, obviously, this requires compilation. Make sure this is ticked. You can test your file by clicking the link here. All right, and you can see your CSS file has been correctly generated. We've got our main font class, it's color blue, and it's used the correct variable. So now let's go back and talk a bit more about caching. Now, what you will notice is every time you save, the version increases. So I'll save it one more time. This is now version 4, and you will notice the name has changed. So we've got a notation, standard notation of file name dot version number dot extension. This is to ensure that we have cache busting, very efficient and very reliable. Now, for developers who've used Require.js or Webpack, the version number and cache busting can require a little bit of work. Require.js, I've found it not very good at cache busting. Webpack, a little better, but it requires a workflow which will bundle your JavaScript files and CSS files, but then you need your HTML to refer to the correct bundle with some cache busting. So there's a whole workflow that you have to configure, and a whole lot of work and time. And time is often what I don't have. So the way we handle this is we actually use a technique to refer to the version, and I will talk a little bit about that later on. But to illustrate this, if you go to your settings and we increase the font to 16, right, save it, we go back to our main file here, right, the font size has not changed. So in this case, your settings, as they're compiled on the server, we need to notify the main file that yes, things have changed. So I've saved an additional time. We're now up to main.5.css, and you can see that we have the font size correctly referred. So now let's move to our JavaScript libraries. So you can right click, new JavaScript file, and we will refer to the famous jQuery. So here's jQuery. You may click on it, and obviously we have nothing here, but we have some shortcuts that you can use. So a very useful jQuery.min, download it. Fantastic. It's been minified already, as you can see with the .min, and we can save that. Another library that we use as a standard is Vue. So we'll download Vue. It's minified already. Click Save. Now, any other libraries we could use, there are a number of them that we use for our apps, and they include Viewlidate for view validation, Axios for retrieving JSON data, jQuery cookie for managing cookies, Moments for date and time manipulation, Underscore is very good for string manipulation, and Foundation, as we did before. So let's go on and create or modify our layout. Now, in our layout, I want to refer to two styles. So the styles that Foundation offers and my main style for my site. So we'll do this. The best way to refer in the path is to refer to global. So we'll start with a /, which will take us to the root. Specify the folder global. Then SCSS, the subfolder, and then main.css, you would think. But as I mentioned before, this won't be good enough, because if there are any changes to the CSS, they won't be reflected. The browser will cache, hopefully in memory, the CSS file and will retrieve from memory every time. So any changes on the server will be completely unnoticed. So the way we've provided for this, without having to go through a whole workflow of minification, compilation, bundling, and so forth, all you have to do with those files is go *.scss, and we're good to go. When the page is first retrieved on the server, it will analyze this file and then retrieve the actual version that's stored for this particular main.scss. So I'll copy this, and I'd like to load Foundation. So I can just go Foundation. Now it's unlikely to change, so I don't need to do that. If we do change it, we can always go .star.css, but it's a very static file that we're dealing with. So now let's try it. Save it. Now this is the layout, right? So there's no URL for the layout. You have to go to the HTML page, which will use the layout. And now you can test the HTML page. Okay, well, this is looking good. The header's bigger. Let's have a look at the page source. Foundation.css, main.5.css. That is fantastic. So it's correctly identified the latest version. Text with footer and a header. Fantastic. So another one that we can use is to have one point of entry is require.js. So as the require.js has some shortcomings, but we've overcome these by having our asterisks, which will do our cache busting for us. But otherwise, require.js is very good at single point of entry and loading all the files that we need, all the JavaScript files that we need. So there'll be one more JavaScript, global JavaScript that we need to download. So let's go new JavaScript file. We'll call it appropriately require. Click on the file and it will be there somewhere. Yes, this is the very first one. Download it. And there it is. So now that we have a require.js, we can use it in our HTML page. Now, before we do so, this is a simple call, but we'll go a bit further and load some configs. Every time we load a page, we will need to load the global files, so jQuery, view, and so forth. So I don't want to have to repeat that every time. So what we'll do is we'll create a config, global config.js. Click on the file. What config.js will do for us is load jQuery and view in this case. So we refer the global, back to root, global JS, jQuery, and view. So both located here. Save that. Now you're wondering about the compilation here for the JavaScript files. So whenever we create JavaScript, it should be compiled because we support the ES6 notation, so it needs to be compiled to lower spec ES5 to be run on more browsers. So now let's go back and so now let's go back to our page, and our page, we've got a main file here, we'll look at that later. What we want to do is create a load file. The load file has for responsibility to load all our libraries and our main file for this particular page. So here it is. So first we have a config URL, right, which refers to our global config file. As I mentioned before, with JavaScript and CSS equally, there's always been issues with cache busting. It's always been difficult. So that's why we introduced the ability to automatically have versions detected. So to make sure you load the latest config file, which is, let's have a look again, config file refers to all the different paths for require.js, right, that it will use. So when we refer to jQuery, require.js knows that's where it can be found, and then same for view. Now you notice there's no extension. It's because .js is the standard, so require.js automatically does that. So let's go back to our load file. With the asterisk, it will automatically generate the version number. Now, I want also the URL to main, right, which is this guy right there. Same thing, we need to make sure we have the correct version for cache busting. And now here's require.js. Okay, so firstly, we load our config. right? That's the very first thing we load because well, we need to have our configuration set before we refer to any other file. Once this is done, we call require.js again, and now we refer to jQuery in view, which were just paths which were just configured. So this is what we're referring to. And once we've loaded our libraries, then we load our main file, right, which we have just configured here. Show console message. And here we go. Once again, we require compilation because it's ES6 notation. There may not be anything specific here, but that's just the best way to go about it. So let's check our file. See version 2. Bang. All right, so it's loaded config. Version 2, let's have a look. It's at version 2. Our main file, okay, it's only version 1, is that correct? Yes, that is correct. It's version 1. And everything looks the same. Fantastic. All right. So now we have our load file. Now, our main file, we don't have anything in there, so we might use view at this point. So now I have some code prepared previously. So what we're going to do is firstly import view. So I import view, so now I can refer to it below by going new view. I'm going to attach to EL text, which will be an ID in our HTML. I'm loading the data with the title. We'll go to make sure we can recognize this. So this is a standard view notation. Components. We'll look at components a little bit later on. The mounted event and the methods. So when I click edit, I'll output a console message. I will output to the console a message so we know it works. Click save. One thing that I didn't highlight is the use of jQuery. So as you remember, in our load, we're loading jQuery. So jQuery is available for us and we can use it immediately. And to demonstrate this, we'll be changing whatever element has the main font class and change the CSS background color to black. So now let's go to our HTML and we need to add some more text. Now the standard template that you will get for your installation will have this message which reminds you how to implement cache busting. And how to refer to files and their locations. So number one is your global path, and number two, page relative, right? So from any page you can refer to any page, but generally you refer to the local one. And now we have our single point of entry, which is provided by required.js. We don't really need to load a different version for required.js at this point, I don't think, but you can always do that later on. But we definitely need to have some cache busting for our load file. This is our own load file, which will be very fluid, as in we'll change it a fair bit. So make sure you have the dot asterisk dot notation and refer to the path as highlighted here. So what will happen is required.js will be loaded, and then required.js will in turn load our load file. So we're here, this is the actual header for which we will change the background colors. It's the main dash font, which we are referring to in our main JS file. And here below we have our EL text, which view will mount, and our mustache notation, which refers to the data right here. Now we haven't referred to the title that view was referencing, so the H1 and we'll do H2 mustache. What did we call it? Title. That's all case sensitive, so need to be careful. Title H2, and view should merge this title very easily. Actually, just testing the file, I did have some issues with required.js. My local cache had seemed to save a blank version of required.js, right? An empty file. I probably referred to it without having saved it previously. So the way to solve it for me was to put the asterisks, or you could just hard code in this case, since the file's not going to change the version, which in our case was 6 because I saved it multiple times, but there need to be some cache busting. So it's something you need to know, that with this platform, unfortunately, what will happen is that if the file doesn't exist, you at this point we may change this, but you don't get an error. So if, for example, I refer to a non-existent file, so I'll go here, I'll come here, and let's say I'll make a spelling mistake, requires. It doesn't actually give me an error, it just gives me a blank file. So that's something to keep in mind. So now that we have everything working as expected, I can go to the file and you can see that the background, is black. We have a view title, view text, and our footer. We should also have some consoles, JavaScript files loaded when we loaded all the JavaScript files via require.js. Now we can extend this a little bit and code so that we call the edit method. So we'll add a button. And remember, we load at view at the EL text level, so the button will need to be within EL text. Simple button. Using the view notation, v on, clicked, and we'll use the function here, edit, and this should change our background. Change background. So now there's an issue with this because I don't know if you've noticed, but the main font here, if we refer to our CSS, up here in global, just uses whatever body color. So to make it more obvious, we'll change to yellow. Now go back to our CSS, to our HTML, and this should turn yellow. Yet I believe we still have an issue, which is background is turned to black as soon as we load this page. So we'll move it to the edit method and we should be good to go. Okay, so I don't understand why this changed to black instantly. Okay, after some debugging, I found the issue. Now, what you've got to realize is that the asterisk notation for cache busting only goes so far. So it doesn't go down the tree to find out what each file is doing. So if you have some dependency, the top level file will need to be manually changed, the version that is. So you save it one more time. So to illustrate this point, you can see when I look at all the files that are loaded, if I look at load.2.js, now this is the correct version for load, version 2. But unfortunately, within load, a number of files change, right? I mean, jQuery is relatively static, so is view, but our main file is not. So if you look at this, it has loaded version 2 of our main file, but our main file is at version 3. So there's a very simple solution to this, and that is to go to our load file, let it know that things have changed and we need to do some cache busting. So we're now at version 3. Now when we load our HTML file, we have a much better scenario. Now I cannot see my button, so we can go to so the button is there. We'll try and style it. So let's go and our own CSS here. So we'll go button and give it a height, 20 pixels, and a width. Save that. Now we need to refer to our main file. We can see in the global layout, we already refer to the global CSS files, but we really need to load them here as well. So if we just grab this code, the style sheet, but we want page 1, we want an SCSS, and we want our main file. We'll do cache busting every time. So here we go. Okay. So there's our button. We'll need to do some enhancements. Okay, I'm back after doing some styling to fix this issue. It's rather unimportant, but just to show you, gave all this styling to the button. One of the issues with buttons is you need to make sure it's inline block if you want to display next to the text, and everything is looking much better. So let's have a look. We've got our button here, and we've got our background yellow. So if I click this button, it doesn't quite work. There was a mistake here. It's the on click. Save that. Let's go back to our page, and our background changes. Now this is to demonstrate the power of LampCRM mini apps. There's very little you can't do, and it's particularly powerful with the cache busting, which allows you to very quickly create some useful applications. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.